Risk is the chance of something happening that will impact on us achieving our objectives. There are all sorts of risks facing our projects, including schedule risk, which is the risk of delivering a project later than expected, and cost risk, which is the risk of going over budget. Systems engineering certainly assists in the management of an array of these sorts of risks, but it's technical risk that's the primary focus of systems engineering. Technical risk could include delivering a system that is not up to the required standard in terms of function and performance, or is not able to be maintained in accordance with the support concept, or is not sufficiently reliable to carry out its intended purpose, or is too expensive or difficult to produce in the required quantities. To understand individual risks and to compare different risks to one another, we need to look at all of them to appreciate their individual likelihood and their individual impact. At one end of the spectrum, we might be facing risks that are extremely likely to occur and will have dire consequences on our objectives if they do occur. At the other end of the spectrum, we might be facing risks that are very unlikely and will only have a very small impact on our objectives. The former are called extreme risks, and the latter are called insignificant risks. Naturally, in between those extremes will be risks with different combinations of likelihood and consequence, resulting in an array of risk severity assessments. Systems engineering is a discipline that continually assists with risk management. For example, we conduct progressive design reviews as we pass through the design phase to try and detect and correct errors as early as possible. We conduct rolling evaluation programs and audits as the system passes through design and development and into construction and production to ensure that we've come up with a properly documented design that actually works. And we're always considering design alternatives and choosing the most balanced design approach to our problems. These are all examples of how systems engineering contributes to technical risk management. Sometimes we are confronted with risks that are so severe that they need action. Classic responses to severe technical risks are to avoid the risk by taking an alternative design approach, or to reduce the risk by reducing either its likelihood or its impact, or by transferring the risk onto another party who is better placed to manage the risk. Let's say the land upon which we're building our house is a sloped block. There might be a risk of subsidence on the block that's deemed just too high to accept. To avoid this risk, we could include a retaining wall in our design concept, or we could use excavation to level the block. It should be noted that by avoiding one risk, in this case subsidence, we are invariably exposing ourselves to other risks. For example, if we took the excavation option, the excavation allows us to avoid the subsidence risk, but the process might be very expensive and time-consuming and difficult to predict, thereby exposing us to cost and schedule risk. Let's look at an example of reducing rather than avoiding risk. Our house design concept might include a spiral staircase. Although that's compact and pleasing to the eye, the probability of someone falling down the spiral staircase might be deemed to be just too high by the house owners, and a more traditional staircase is requested instead. There's still a risk that someone might fall down the more traditional staircase, but the probability will be much reduced, and the revised risk severity might now be acceptable. Other examples of risk management within our house design might be to build spare capacity into the house for future growth. For example, we might reduce the risk of overloading our electrical system by ensuring that each circuit is only carrying 50% of its design capacity. This reduces the risk of overloading our circuits and provides a platform for future growth. Another design approach that we may take is to build redundancy into our designs, especially for safety or mission critical elements of the design. For example, we might consider our watering system in our garden to be critical. If our watering system fails, we risk losing very expensive plants, lawns and gardens. Of course, we might be relying on the garden for our food as well. In this case, we might decide to design a watering system that uses the house power under normal conditions, but is also backed up by a battery in the case of an electrical failure. Another risk mitigator is to use design diversity in our system. Design diversity is where we use different design approaches in the design of our redundant systems so that something that causes one approach to fail will not necessarily cause the other approach to fail. Let's look at another example of using the concept of design redundancy and diversity to reduce technical risk. Let's say we're working on an aircraft system and there's a computer system on board that aircraft that simply must not lose electrical power. It might be a flight control computer, for example. Engineers will be tasked to design an electrical system to provide electrical power to that flight control computer. Initially, their design might involve driving a generator from one of the engines to provide the necessary electrical power. Upon review, this design may be viewed as an unacceptable risk because the probability of generator failure may simply be too high, and the subsequent impact on flight safety may be just too dire to accept. In short, a failed generator equals no electrical power. No electrical power equals no flight control computer. No flight control computer equals a plane crash. So the engineers revised their design and used the concept of redundancy by adding a second generator to run off the other engine as a backup. If the main generator fails, the backup generator can take over. Another review of that design reveals that there are still circumstances that could cause both generators to fail. This circumstance is often called a common mode of failure. Engineers may solve this by using the concept of design diversity, and in this case they might simply add a battery. The battery performs the same function as the generators, i.e. it provides electrical power, but it does that in a different way by using chemical rather than mechanical means. By using design techniques like redundancy and diversity, the engineers have addressed the technical risk, in this case the risk of losing electrical power to a critical computer. Note that they have not reduced the impact of the risk in this case. If the computer loses power, the aircraft will still crash, but they have reduced the probability of the computer losing power. Because risk severity is a function of both probability and impact, they have reduced the risk severity by reducing the probability of it occurring. Spare capacity, redundancy and design diversity have been incorporated in the design of many technical systems that are all around us today in order to mitigate technical risk. Examples include cars, transportation systems, aircraft, medical facilities, and so on. Sometimes, though, we consider the risks that we're facing and decide to take on the risks because of the potential benefits that may accrue as a result of taking the risk. For example, making use of leading-edge technology in our design can be risky due to all the unknowns. However, there may be major advantages in terms of function and performance associated with using that leading-edge technology. In other words, sometimes the old risk equals return adage is well worth considering. Throughout this course, we've discussed the idea of periodically reviewing our work at logical points in the design and development process. This is an effective way of detecting errors, conflicts, and problems with our design as early as possible. After all, we know that the earlier we detect issues, the easier and cheaper they are to rectify. In this course, we're suggesting reviewing things after major transitions. For example, we spoke of a system-level review called the System Design Review when we transitioned from stakeholder to system-level requirements. We suggested a subsystem-level review called the Preliminary Design Review, and we also suggested a detailed design review called the Critical Design Review when the designers believed that they'd completed the detailed design of the system. The names of these reviews are not important. It's the concept of periodic and progressive review that we're trying to talk about here. Conducting reviews of this nature just makes sense, and they're not mysterious systems engineering activities. They are simply technical meetings that are conducted in a controlled and a professional manner, involving appropriate groups of people that aim to review work packages, approve plans for the next stages, and resolve any problems that are facing the development effort. When I say that the meetings are conducted in a controlled and professional manner, I'm just referring to standard meeting protocol, such as making sure that we've got an agenda for each review which outlines what's going to be covered, how long it's going to take, and who is leading the presentations. Ensuring that minutes are taken and agreed upon prior to the conclusion of the meeting, and an agreed chairperson to maintain control over the meeting. These technical reviews must be held at an appropriate time within the development program. If they're held too early, the development effort will not be sufficiently advanced for the review to be meaningful. If they're held too late, we might miss opportunities to rectify issues or problems in a timely fashion. My overwhelming experience here is that reviews tend to be held too early rather than too late. My experience is that some people like to be seen to be progressing on schedule even if the technical program is lagging. The attitude seems to be that the technical program will just have to catch up after the review. Artificially conducting reviews against the project schedule can give the impression that the project is on schedule. Conducting technical reviews too early in order to artificially adhere to a project schedule is not recommended. Instead, we should fix problems with the technical program as early as possible in the systems engineering process. There's a great expression that applies here, that bad news is not like red wine. Bad news does not get better with age. It's always best to recognise problems as early as possible rather than pushing them later, where they'll invariably become much worse. Systems engineering planning must take account of the technical program and plan for these design reviews. Design reviews will take time, cost money, and will involve a number of different people. That's why planning for them is important. The number and nature of technical reviews will be different for every single project, so we must think about every project as a unique undertaking when considering how to conduct these reviews. A risky project, using developmental technology and involving large sums of money, will be reviewed more thoroughly than a project at the other end of the spectrum.
If you're interested in reading further into the topics we covered in this presentation, you may wish to read the corresponding chapters in the texts associated with the course.